Well, let me again say welcome, and it's good to be back. I was gone last week, and I can tell you that there's something just so cool knowing that when I am out of town, I miss being here with my church family, but it's great knowing we have such an awesome team. It just rolls so well, and I know last week Rachel Ginneman just did an amazing job bringing the message and continuing this face-to-face series that we're in. Good. I was down in what I would say, and we would say, was Starkville, Mississippi. But when you're there, they'll let you know that no, it's Starkville. It's Starkville, Mississippi, because down south they use a lot less vowels. And so down there preaching at a cool church called the Orchard Church, and just good to be back. And good to be back here to continue this series. And as I mentioned a minute ago, today we're looking at this face-to-face encounter, which is what this series is all about. It's about these one-on-one moments that Jesus had, and can we learn from those. But this one's with a mom. And moms are special. And what we see here is a mom who really at the heart of it, like any good mother, she's just looking out for the best interests of her sons. She just wants what's great. And I know growing up that's the mom I experienced. And my mom, I know, made so many sacrifices to make sure we had the things that we wanted or needed. I know for a fact that there were times where she would go without that new dress so that we could maybe have the shoes or the sporting gear that we needed, because that's what moms do. And now I'm married to that. And my wife is that same mom, and she models that so well. Although I do remember the first time she watched my mom do that. We were newly married, and probably the first time visiting my parents' home after we were married. And one morning we all got up, and my parents have a hot tub out on their back deck, and we were out there having our morning coffee together. And then my mom comes out, and she begins to serve us breakfast in the hot tub, which was what my mom does. And my young bride was not having it. She's like, "Don't you think that you're getting that from me?" You know, and she was like, it was just funny. It was something we joke about all the time. And yeah, she doesn't serve me breakfast in the hot tub. But that's what moms do. And I think that's what we have happening here. We have a situation where Jesus is teaching his disciples. He's got his 12 disciples. And in fact, you go and turn in your Bibles. We're in Matthew chapter 20. What's happening early in the chapter is he's doing a teaching that's very familiar. He's talking about the fact that the last shall be first and the first shall be last. When the kingdom comes, when he returns and God's kingdom is established, that's the order of things. And so he's literally giving them this incredible deep truth, this powerful biblical nugget of saying, like, listen, quit trying to be first. It's going to be reversed. And they're hearing this teaching. Then he takes the 12 aside, and he has a little bit more conversation with them about what's getting ready to happen, his arrest and crucifixion and death and all those things, as he continues to try and prepare them for what's coming, even though they never do quite understand it. In fact, his patience is incredible. I would have swapped them out for a new 12 months before this. And now we get to this next moment. So understand, we've just had all this teaching. He takes the 12 aside, and then we pick up in chapter 20, in verse 20, and it says this: "Then the mother of James and John, the sons of Zebedee, came to Jesus with her sons. She knelt respectfully to ask a favor. 'What is your request?' he asked. She replied, 'In your kingdom, please let my 2 sons sit in the places of honor next to you, one on your right and the other on your left.' But Jesus answered her by saying to them, 'You don't know what you're asking. Are you able to drink from the bitter cup of suffering I'm about to drink?' 'Oh, yes,' they replied, 'we are able.' Jesus told them, 'You will indeed drink from my bitter cup, but I have no right to say who will sit on my right or on my left. My Father has prepared those places for the ones he has chosen.' When the 10 other disciples heard what James and John asked, they were indignant." So we pause right there, and that word indignant is a fancy word for saying they were ticked off. I mean, what is happening here? Are you serious? I mean, this mom is coming, and it's, I don't even know how mom got there. We literally just read that Jesus took the 12 aside privately. Somehow mom's there. Now, the same story is retold in the Gospel of Mark, but interestingly enough, mom is not mentioned in the book of Mark. Now, some writers have suggested, or some commentators have suggested, that this was a separate incident, meaning that James and John went to Jesus first and said, "Hey, can we sit on your right and left?" And Jesus says no, and so they pull the classic move of, "That's fine, we're going to tell our mom." That could be what happened, but the dialogue is very, very similar. In fact, I think what happened here is that Mark just chose to omit that. Whether he didn't think it was important or whether it's like, hey, listen, James, John, we're bros. I'm going to save you some embarrassment. We're not going to tell everybody that mom grabbed you by the ears and dragged you to Jesus. However this played out, we have a mom who is coming to Jesus, and what she's saying is this: when you sit on your throne, will you take my 2 sons and will you honor them above the other disciples of whom are sitting here and can hear me asking this? This has just got uncomfortable. And this is a scene that is not uncommon. I don't know, maybe you've lived it out. Maybe there was something you remember as a child that your mom was after you to do, like, you're going to do this, and she keeps asking, and you still haven't done it. Eventually, what does she do? All right, now we're going to go do this. I'm coming with you. I will make it happen. As a coach, I remember some of these conversations. Some of you here, you've played sports, and you've coached sports at different levels, and there's inevitably going to be that parent that comes to you. And they're like, listen, I just think my son or my daughter, they deserve more playing time. I think they're the star of the team and they should be out there. And it's like, yeah, I disagree. I think they stink. No, I would never say that. I'm kidding. I would say that. So you're like, wow. No, but no, actually, I've always found a way. I want to listen. I understand. Even if I disagree inside, there's a level of like being patient, understanding what's happening. It's just a parent doing what parents do. And so I don't think the bulk of this message is necessarily about the mom or scolding mom for doing this, but I think it's the teaching moment that Jesus sees coming out of this. So we pick this up, continuing on in verse 25, and what we have happening here now is this. But Jesus called them together and said, you know that the rulers in this world lord it over their people, and officials flaunt their authority over those under them. But among you it will be different. Whoever wants to be a leader among you must first be your servant, and whoever wants to be first among you must become your slave. For even the Son of Man came not to be served, but to serve others, and to give his life as a ransom for many. So there's a pretty foundational, iconic statement of Jesus that has a lot to do with this whole transformed life, and that is this, that even Jesus, Son of God, God himself, he did not come to be served, but he came to serve. And this is kind of presenting that idea that if you've spent any amount of time in church at all, you've heard the talk about that we're to have a servant's heart, and we're to be like servants. And it's not a new concept. It's a concept that we see supported throughout the New Testament. We see in Mark, it's repeated again, that the Son of Man came not to be served, but to serve. In Philippians, we read things like, don't look out for your own interest, but take interest in others. Though he was God, he did not think of equality with God as something to cling to. Time and time again, we see this example of what it means to be a servant. But what Jesus is not saying here is this. He is not telling us, he's not telling you and me today, go do servant things. He's not giving us a task list. So unlike some other messages that we may get out of God's word, this is not a call to action, meaning this is not telling you to go and sign up for the next service project. I mean, do that, but that's not what this is saying. This isn't saying you to now be like, you know what, I need to be more intentional about scheduling serving things into my day and into my weeks. This is not a call to action. It's a call to being. Because you can do servant things, but it doesn't make you a servant. Yesterday, I think it was phenomenal that our women's ministry were able to go out there and partner with Freedom Builders and do that special thing of building this ramp that's going to radically change the life of this lady. And they had a chance, I know, to speak with her daughter who lived next door. And there's so many cool Jesus moments. And I love their servant attitude. I love the servant things they did. But the ladies that attended, just because they went and served, it doesn't make them servants. Years ago, I had a chance, I was out west, and I had a chance to go horseback riding on an actual true blue cattle farm. And I was out there with the real cowboys, and we were out there doing cowboy stuff, and I was riding a cowboy horse, and I was crying cowboy tears. It was amazing. I got done, and it was an exhausting day, and it was an incredible experience. But you want to know something? Just because I did cowboy stuff didn't make me a cowboy. I just did it once. And I think there are still times where we hear this concept of servant and being a servant and all these things, and we won't go to action. We're like, oh yeah, no, let's make sure that I start doing more of those things. Stop doing and ask yourself, am I ready to start being? Are you ready to be about this servant life? See, we live in a culture, we live in a world that really supports the exact opposite. We live in a world that's all about me first. It's a me first world. Everything about this society and culture is like, hey, make sure you take care of you. Make sure that you're happy. Make sure that you're succeeding. I mean, we look at advertising slogans. Everything about some of these advertisers, they fuel that. We read even the Army. What's their slogan? Be the best that you can be. Awesome. I do want to be the best. Burger King. Have it your way. You know what? I want a burger, and I do want it my way. Thank you, Burger King. You know what I mean? That's what they're hoping happens. There's the makeup company, L'Oreal. Because you're worth it. Man, I need some makeup. And I know this other stuff's a little cheaper, but L'Oreal's a little more expensive. But doggone it, you know what? I'm worth it. You know, I mean, that's how we live, right? It's like, well, but I want, but I mean, I need to be happy, and I want to be fulfilled, and I want to have all these things. And what happens is we live in this world that continues to be an exact counter messaging of what Jesus is saying here. He's not saying go do servant things. He's not saying change your schedule. He's not saying put something into your phone calendar right now. What he is saying this is that when you ask Jesus into your life, and we experience what's called a transformation, the old me is gone, the new has come. It's not just my sins and guilt. That's certainly the biggest part of it, and that's the salvation. But when the old me is gone, my old agenda is gone. My old way of functioning is gone. My set of dreams and goals, I surrender them now. I have a new set because I'm transformed, and part of that is I no longer live a life that's me first. I live a life that's about being a servant. I live the servant life. It's an inside-out change. And so in order for us to even examine what happens, we have to understand, what got in their way? What was happening with James and John that they allowed this to happen? They could have stopped, Mom, maybe. I mean, they still sat there and they continued in the conversation. Think of this. Jesus had just got done talking about the last shall be first, the first shall be last. I mean, I can imagine the scene that Jesus is like, hey, listen, write this down. This is great. Okay. The last shall be first, the first shall be last. Wow, that is fantastic. Thank you so much, Jesus. Hey, listen, by the way, can we be first? Can we sit in those cool seats next to you on the left, right? Can we be honored? Can we be exalted above everybody? Is that cool? Are you down with that? I mean, Jesus had to be like, what is going on? You don't understand. When I come in and I change you, it changes everything. But something got in their way. Something made it impossible. So understand this call. This isn't a call like when he's calling you out about your spiritual gifts or your talents. This isn't just for some people, okay? I mean, we read that some people will be teachers and preachers and all this, and we have different gifts and we're different body parts. This is not that conversation. This is not that message. This is not a message that some of us need to listen to. This is a message that any one of us that have asked Jesus into our life, that have experienced this transformation, we are expected, we should be living this servant life. But something gets in our way. So instead of spending time talking about what a servant is, because we know, you know what those descriptions are. You don't need me to tell you that. Let's talk about this. Why isn't it happening? Well, I think there's a few things. First one is this. I can't be a servant if I'm not content with where God has me. I can't be about others. I can't be about the servant life if I'm not content with what God is doing in my life. Here's where this comes into play. You ever play the comparison game? Yeah? I mean, I typically will say that social media is the cause. It's not the cause. It's certainly made it more prevalent. I mean, it's easier to see why the people you went to high school with are having more toys and trips and success than I am. It's easier to watch other people's life and get called into that comparison. It's easier to be in that place where, wait a second, that's not fair. Where's mine? And here's where this comes into play. If I'm not content with what God is doing, I'm going to spend all of my time trying to change it. I'm going to change my focus, and I'm going to be so consumed with that, about what I don't have, instead of being able to live with what I do have. The comparison game is something that it's evil. And it's not just new. I grew up as a kid. My dad was a pastor, and when we first moved out to San Diego, I was just 1 or 2 years old. It was a small church, and we didn't have much money. We lived on hand-me-downs. In fact, some of our hand-me-downs were hand-me-downs from hand-me-downs. And we lived in a place where it seemed like everyone else had more. I just remember as a kid always feeling like, what's up with that? Like, BMX bikes are a big deal. And my parents got us a good BMX bike, but they have better BMX bikes. We might get a new pair of shoes, but they always had better shoes, or they had better this, better that. And I just remember feeling growing up like, wow, why am I always getting the short end of the stick? Why isn't God doing more for me? And I would be so consumed with this. The whole phrase of keeping up with the Joneses. How many people, and I'm not talking about anybody here necessarily, but I'm saying, how many people are like in massive debt because they're just trying to keep up? They're just trying to do something, to chase some contentment. Here's the tricky thing with contentment. The more you chase it, the more elusive it becomes. There's no contentment in what we can achieve. There is something to be found if we take a different step and we allow this servant life to take hold of our heart. So with that in mind, there's a passage from Jesus in the book of Luke that is familiar, but there's a different turn on it. So Luke chapter 12, starting in verse 22, it says this, "Then turning to his disciples, Jesus said, 'That is why I tell you not to worry about everyday life, whether you have enough food to eat or enough clothes to wear, for life is more than food and your body more than clothing.'" We jump down to verse 29. "And don't be concerned about what to eat and what to drink. Don't worry about such things. These things dominate the thoughts of unbelievers all over the world, but your Father already knows what you need." Now, I say we've read this because many of us have, and often we read this, and it has so much to do with maybe the needs right in front of us. Those bills that are due next week, that car repair that has to happen now, those are real, and yes, it does apply to that, but there's something larger. There in verse 30 it says, those are the things that dominate the people that don't know me. And there's so many people I see that although they're believers, that they love Jesus, and they're awesome people, I watch how dominated their life is about what they don't have. If we go back to how this all started, what happened with Adam and Eve? What was the core problem there? Think about their current situation before sin. They were in the Garden of Eden. We're told it was a paradise, unlike anything we'll ever experience. They had everything they could want. They had all the food. They had all the shelter. They had everything that anybody could need. And they also had this beautiful intimacy with God. There was no sin. There was no pain. There was no sickness. And they had never caught a cold. I don't even think there was poison ivy in the garden yet. That's sin. It was perfect. Satan saw one chink in the armor. And he comes to him, and basically this is what he says. Hey, but there's more. There's something God's not giving you. Everything you got is great, but you want to know something? If you do this, you get something else. It was a lack of contentment with where God had them that made them susceptible. And I get it, that maybe where you are right now is not where you would have painted the picture. This is not the story you would have written. You would not have predicted or wished maybe for some of the trials or struggles or current situations you're in. But at the end of the day, the only contentment I have is that I am in Him. That's it. And there's so much beauty there, because once I'm free from worrying about what I don't have and worrying about what they do have and how can I get that, once I'm free from all of that, now I am content to simply be full of gratitude and worship and thanking Him for where I am, and now I'm ready to think about others. Now I'm ready for the servant life. I also think this. I think you can't be about the servant life if I lack humility. And I know that word humility is kind of very complicated, and there's a lot of different avenues that can go. But usually when I hear the word humility and I think of different sayings and quotes, I think of the C.S. Lewis quote that simply says that humility is not thinking less of yourself, it's just thinking of yourself less often. And again, we live in a world that says, no, think of yourself first. But when I lack humility, I can't be a servant. I can't be a servant at heart if I'm thinking about the things that are about me. In fact, that's what's kind of going on in Philippians chapter 2 when Paul gives us these words. Verses 3 and 4. Don't be selfish. Don't try to impress others. Be humble, thinking of others as better than yourselves. Don't look out only for your own interests, but take an interest in others too. See, my wife and I, we've done a fair bit of work with marriages, and we just see that God's great desire for marriages to thrive and flourish, and we've done counseling and seminars, and we've been through counseling ourselves, because our marriage isn't perfect. But we've discovered that over the years that so often when a marriage is going through some tough times, if we reverse engineer it enough, the moment it started going bad is when the word self began to enter in. When the individuals became more concerned about my needs and my fulfillment and my happiness and what I need out of this marriage. And I'm not saying we don't have needs, but I do know this. At the very beginning of all of this, God's design for marriage is that the moment I said I do to my beautiful wife, the moment we begin this union, now my agenda changed. My agenda now is about what are her needs, what brings her happiness, what meets her emotional desires, what can I do to serve her. My entire day should be completely consumed with how do I serve her. And it's the same concept when we apply to anything else in our lives, that the moment I make it about me, I don't have the humility to think of others first and to put their interests above mine. I can't be a servant if I'm all about me. Then I think it leads to this. I think some of us, I can't be a servant if I'm seeking recognition and affirmation. This one is just wrecking people these days. You know how I see it? Because of social media. And I mean, I'm on social media. There's times where I wish I wasn't, and there's times where I do and whatever, and I don't post a lot, but I watch it. You know what I see every once in a while, and it makes me sad. It doesn't make me angry. It makes me sad. As I see certain patterns from individuals. And I'm not thinking of anybody specific, so don't worry about it. If you think I'm talking about you, that's just the Holy Spirit. It is you. You know how I know it's happening? The number of selfies someone takes. Maybe you have that Facebook friend. It's like, wow, really? 15 selfies today. Here I am going out to the store. Here I am at the gas pump. Here I am sitting in my car. Here I'm sitting in my house. Here I am going to sleep. Here I am filming myself as I sleep. Watch me sleep. It's like there's this crazy thing. And here's what makes me sad in my heart is that for some of these folks, I know their story. I know that they're maybe coming off some very wounding times, some times where they've been maybe left, maybe they've gone through a messy divorce. I know that deep down inside, there is someone there that is just struggling to feel seen and valued and loved. And so the response is going to be this: I'm going to make sure that I live a life that screams, look at me, look at me. And so everything about that existence becomes, what can I do that makes other people say, good job, you're beautiful, you're smart, you can run 5K, awesome job, all of these things. And again, I'm not saying it's all bad, but I'm saying for some of us, somewhere in the heart, we're struggling. We're struggling. And I can't be about the servant life if I'm working so hard to feel valued by a world that can never offer that. See, I know some of you have probably come off something difficult. I know some of you have probably been through some deep hurts, and maybe you question who you are and where you are. Let me give you this. There is no identity greater than the identity that you have in Jesus Christ. There is no need to go out and scream, look at me. There's no need to find that fulfillment and that affirmation. It's empty. It's hollow. It's what Jesus is talking about in Matthew 6 when he says this in verse 2. When you give to someone in need, don't do it as the hypocrites do, blowing trumpets in the synagogues and streets to call attention to their acts of charity. I tell you the truth, they have received all the reward they will ever get. And I read that, and the funny thing is this. I don't think Jesus is pulling some fictional story. This happens. He's talking about something that actually happens, which means at some point, somebody was like, you know what? I know that this guy over here is really in need, so I'm going to give him some help. I'm going to give some money to make sure he gets the bills paid and food on the table. So this is what I need you to do. So trumpeteers, when I go over to him, I need you to really lay on it. You know, Ryan, I need you to lay down some sweet saxophone, some good charity vibe, okay? You over here, you're my hired pointers and shouters, okay? So when I hand the guy the money, I need you to point and shout, look at that guy, look at that guy. And I really need y'all to make a big deal out of this because, man, that's going to show everybody how great I am. What a sad state that is, right? What a sad situation of somebody screaming like, look at how good I am. Look at how wonderful I am. But here's the deal. Some of us, from our woundedness, from this place where we think the world can offer it, we're screaming, look at me. And the whole time, we're missing the true fact that he sees you, he loves you, and he values you right where you are. You are given this incredible honor In fact, the Bible says, look at how much God loves. He pours out and lavishes this love so much so that he calls us what? He calls us his children. He loves you. You don't need the world to look at you. You don't need the affirmation. You don't need to be seen. I don't think Jesus has Facebook. He's not even seeing the selfies. He sees you where you are. And I can't be about the servant life. I can't be leaving if I'm so busy trying to fuel my own needs. And I'm so worried about my identity. You've been bought and paid for. You're good. I also think this. I can't be about the servant's life if I lack faith in God's plan. I know it seems like we are like, what do you mean with faith and servant? What does that have to do with it? Well, think of it this way. What do you do when things don't go the way you think they should? This last week I flew home, and thankfully, thank goodness, everything went as planned, but that's not the case so much anymore. In fact, that's rarely the case when you're flying anymore. And a few weeks ago, my wife and I were trying to fly back home. We're trying to get home, and our flights kept getting delayed, and we were already going to get home at midnight, which is like 3.5 hours past my bedtime. Okay, I'm just being straight up with you. But it kept getting later and later, and we had no control. And although I was pretty, I think I was pretty cool and calm on the outside, on the inside I was a wreck. Because I'm processing. Well, how can I, in fact, I'm looking up faster flights. Can I rent a car? What can I do? How can I fix this? How can I get over here? What if we jump to this airline? What if we went here, and then here? How can we go home? How can I fix the thing that's not going so well? And when it comes to this servant life, the way for me to transform my heart and live this way, I can't look and serve others if I'm so busy trying to fix my life. If I'm so busy trying to work through this series of unmet expectations and disappointments because my story is not going the way I hoped it would, or the way I thought it should, or the way other stories are going, when I have this lack of faith in his plan, I'm completely consumed with trying to fix. I'm trying to make the wrongs right. And at some place, there is this opportunity that when I surrender, and I ask him in life, because we talked about this before, salvation is instantaneous. I'm forgiven of my sins. I am saved. I'm in. I'm secure. But now I begin this process of surrendering my life. Part of that is surrendering everything that's about me so that I am free to be about him and to be about others. It's why the two greatest commandments are summed up so frequently in other churches of that we're here to love God and love people, because I'm about the servant life. And Paul was pushing this so hard in his letter to the church in Corinth. He's talking about, this is why I'm teaching this. This is why I say this. And it comes down to this right here. 1 Corinthians 2:5, he says this, I did this so that you would trust not in human wisdom, but in the power of God. You can't be a servant if you don't trust God. See, I know sometimes we hear the word servant and we think of some level of like captivity, like enslavement. And certainly there's plenty of examples in worldly terms where that's the case. But understand this, that being a servant, about the servant life in this way, there's so much freedom in it. There's so much freedom in it. See, yesterday, my wife and I, we had the beautiful chance to celebrate our 20th wedding anniversary. So 28 years ago yesterday, we were married. And it was really special. One, it's 28 years. That's a long time. And considering we're only 38 or 39 years old, that's pretty incredible. It's also one of the rare ones we get to be together. Doing what I do, I speak in the summers a lot. And I think we decided of the 28, that was our 7th anniversary. We were actually together. And so pretty special. And so it got me thinking yesterday. We got home. I didn't even tell you this. We got home, and I was thinking back to our very first anniversary in Greensboro, North Carolina. And I was a youth pastor, and she was a nanny, I think. So we didn't have a lot of money. And I remember coming up on this first anniversary, and ideally you go out to this big fancy dinner, but we couldn't afford that. And so I was like, you know what? I'm gonna make it fancy at home. And I got home long before she did. And I remember I went to the store, and it's like, all right, I'm going to buy steaks, and I'm going to buy the best steaks that we can afford, which means they weren't very good steaks, but they were steak, technically. Went home, and we had this little dining table in our 2-bedroom apartment, and I put a tablecloth on. I got candles out. We didn't have a grill. We had a George Foreman, so I fired up the George Foreman. Cooking our steaks on the George Foreman. I got veggies going. I bought some sparkling grape juice because we didn't drink champagne or wine. And I just remember everything about that day. Seriously, I remember preparing. I remember the roses. I couldn't afford a dozen roses. I got 3 or 4 decent ones, though. And I had a vase. I knew that we had the top of our wedding cake in the freezer. It had been there for a year, and so it was absolutely horrible. Here's the freedom I'm talking about. Nothing about that day was there ever a moment where I was like, man, I sure hope I like the steak. There's nothing about the day was like, well, I don't really want green beans, but she does. No. Here's the freedom. It was a day full of joy and excitement because I was doing everything for her. I was free of me. I was free of selfishness. I was free of pride. I was free of comparison. I was free of everything that would get in the way of me just doing something that was so genuinely and pure about loving and pouring it out on someone else. And what Jesus is saying here is like, listen, you can continue this rat race. You can continue to go out there and be disappointed and be let down and try and fulfill your own dreams and try and chase contentment. Or you can let me have it. You can stop the nuts and you can just simply say, okay, here you go. I'm ready to be about this servant life. That's why he says, deny me and pick up your cross. He's not looking for just a few of us. I think he's saying, like, listen, when I came into your life, this was part of the deal. So now when you begin to become about the servant life at home and you begin to serve your spouse different and you go home and you raise your families different and you go to work and you treat your boss different and your employers different. We go into our neighborhoods different. When I'm living the servant life, it oozes and transforms every aspect of who I am. Because it's not about doing, it's about being. So I'm going to ask you to bow your heads and close your eyes with me for a minute. There's an old hymn that maybe you remember singing in church. I just want you, with your eyes closed, I want you to hear these words of this hymn, and it's so cool. It simply says this: Lord, make me a servant, humble and meek. Lord, let me lift up those who are weak. And may the prayer of my heart just always be, make me a servant. Make me a servant. Make me a servant today. So I don't know what you're holding on to. I don't know which of these areas you're like, yeah, that's why I can't feel it. That's why I'm so focused on me. I don't know the last time I thought about somebody else because I'm so concerned about what's not happening or why it's not right or who's not loving me or why I'm not being affirmed. Whatever it is, I encourage you, that's the prayer, Lord, make me a servant. Finish what you've already started in me. And if you're here today and you've never asked Jesus in your life, oh, it's so cool. It's so beautiful. It's just saying, Jesus, come and forgive me. Begin transforming me. Getting rid of the old me, making me new, clearing me of my sins and my past, what you paid for on the cross. Come into my life and begin this process. And it begins today. So, Father, I think me is always going to be a battle. I think there's always going to be the challenge of thinking through that filter of my needs, my wants, my dreams, my desires. But I pray that we spend less time trying to do servant things and we spend more time just opening ourselves up to allow you to come in and do what only you can do, transforming us into people that are just about that servant life instead of the me first life. I pray that we begin to see incredible changes happen in marriages and in families. I pray that we watch differences change among friend groups and in the workspace and in school hallways when we push back against what the world is telling us. And we start letting you be who you so desperately desire to be in our lives. We thank you for showing us what this looks like. And now we follow you. It's in your name we pray. Amen. Praying for you this week. I challenge you even today as we leave this place, think about, all right, what does the servant life change today? Don't wait till tomorrow. If you wait till tomorrow, you'll wait till Tuesday. If you wait till Tuesday, you'll wait till Friday. If you wait till next Sunday, you don't remember we talked about it. Do something today about it. Start being about that servant life. We love you. We're praying for you. We'll see you next week. You're dismissed.